So what was your high school like?
So I went to this very, very integrated high school in San Francisco between 1969 and 1971 called George Washington High School. And it's a beautiful school. It sits up on a hill overlooking San Francisco Bay and the Golden Gate Bridge. And the interesting thing about the school was that it automatically had diversity without trying. It was a neighborhood school, and so it drew from a lot of different demographics. And the only group that was impacted and brought into the school from outer neighborhoods were African American kids that were bused in from, I believe, Hunters Point, which was in the south part of San Francisco. I didn't really sense too much about the busing because our school was the student body mixed no matter what race or ethnicity you were, and it was very, very broad. I don't know if I said if it was 40% Asian, so that was the majority, already a minority that's a majority, and everybody else was actually a minority. And it was a school that had a very good reputation as a highly academic school, though it had a rival school across the district that was called Lowell, and that was the academic San Francisco high school. And I want to tell you that my dad went to that school, to Lowell. But he chose to send us to Washington, which was our neighborhood school.
Why is that?
That's what I've been thinking about lately after deciding to do this interview. Because, well, I do feel that my parents' thinking had a lot to do with how I approached my experience at Washington High School, in that they were very open-minded, and and they felt they were very, education was most important to them, and they were very, really wanted us to go to public high school. And I know that it was must have been a dilemma for my dad to choose this school for us to attend, which was our neighborhood school. But I think that they're thinking, so we're Jewish, and we had just come off of the Holocaust. I mean, I was born in the 50s. My parents were quite nervous about anti-Semitism. But I think that they were very sensitive to being targeted for who you are. And I think that played into the idea of acceptance of other people, and that nobody was better than anybody else, and that everybody had to work hard to get where they wanted to be. That kind of sounds like Dad.
Yeah. So they felt it was more important you go to a school with a diverse student body rather than just educational excellence.
Yes. Even though it did also have a good reputation. Mm-hmm. It was a school that people liked, it was a beautiful school. And so as a student body, I felt that we really were cohesive. You'll see that I have pictures in the yearbook that I was showing, and you'll just see, and in my memories, that people of all different nationalities and races mixed, and that they were in all classes together, that they were in all activities together, that people of all races were in the leadership positions, the class leaders and elected. We had so the school itself had a lot to do with that spirit. Mm-hmm. I mean, the faculty and staff, because they were also very diverse. We had every color and I don't know about every nationality, but we had every race. in our faculty and staff. I think the other thing that I wanted to talk about was the time that I was going to high school.
This was during the 60s cultural movement. What was that like? How did that affect your school?
Well, I think that we as like adolescents were really impressionable to what was going on in the 60s. I know I was. And I know a lot of my friends were, because right in our backyard in Haight-Ashbury, there was all kinds of things happening, the Summer of Love. And I think it was looking at the world with sort of new eyes, peace, not the old conventions, peace, harmony, and equality, and love. I think that those things started to really be valued, at least. I wouldn't say that my parents joined into that part of it. But I wouldn't say that they didn't.
Yeah.
But
I don't
think,
see Grandpa really getting too into that.
Yeah. They sort of looked askance a little bit at that kind of movement, because also it was maybe questioning a little bit of their own values.
Mm-hmm. More traditional values.
Yes. And but I think that it affected me a lot. And I think it affected the students. I mean, we had things going on like anti-war rallies and just a lot of things related to those events that were happening in that they didn't like. So, but
what was your group of friends like?
So I had that's a good question. I had a lot of different friends. I moved around a bit, so I wasn't too cliquish. There were cliques, and I think there's probably in all schools. I wasn't too cliquish in the sense that I like to move around and make different friends, and so. But I did have a core group of friends that. Mostly, I think they were childhood friends that I went through school with up to that point. Because when you get into high school, you have your core kids, and then you have all these other kids. Don't forget, this was a high school that was huge from today's standards. So it was a 9th, 10th, and 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. The middle school we had what we called junior high, and that was 6th, 7th, 8th. Or 7th, 8th, 9th. I'm getting it mixed up. And then 10th, 11th, 12th. And we had like 1,000 kids in each class. It was like a school of 3,000 kids. So each class was really, really big. So that's sort of like a little bit being a small fish in a big pond, like maybe, but it's funny, when I was looking back on these pictures in the yearbook, I just remembered so many people, the familiarity. So I don't know if I answered your question about what my friends were like, but they were diverse. Let's put it that way. They couldn't
like
help
the school
but
itself,
be
yeah.
like the school itself, and it wasn't like students were divided by intellect or anything. It wasn't tracked like some schools might have a accelerated program and then put other people. So we were all
in the same classes.
Yeah, we might have different teachers for the same class. There was multiple teachers teaching social studies, multiple teachers teaching English. We had a very good lot of different programs that encouraged the cultural differences and so I never was afraid or feared for myself at all. I think that everybody pretty much participated in sort of a harmonious approach.
Did you know about the busing of African American kids from other neighborhoods? And
Yeah,
did your family talk about it?
I don't think my parents ever talked about that. Here's what I observed. This was my awareness of it. We had two sides to the school. there was a front gate, there was a back gate, and that's where I came into school up 30th Avenue. So you saw the house.
Mm-hmm.
We lived like just down below, and I walked
You
up
walked to
30th
school,
Avenue. Yeah, and that was the back gate to Washington High School. The front side of the school, I don't know anybody who came in there except the kids. I know kids did come in that way because if their homes were on that side, but the buses let the kids off on that side of the school.
Mm-hmm.
That I remember. I never talked to anybody who was bused or heard anything about it, but I would be actually curious now to know what that might have been like. I don't think it. The thing that I thought to myself was that it's really a nice school to go to, and I don't know if if the students that were going there felt that they were forced to go there and didn't really want to. That would be my question. But that I did never get that impression because of the involvement of all the students of all color in everything we were doing. So that's as much as of my awareness of it. And I believe they came from Hunters Point because that was like the neighborhood that you heard about when anything was said about neighborhoods that needed to be desegregated.
Can you dig a little bit deeper into that? Because it still is the black part of town in San
It
Francisco.
is.
Can you
Yeah.
talk about some of the stereotypes that you heard or some of the stories you heard about Bayview and Hunters Point? Can you talk to your son, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to, but I don't think that I have a lot of information. I will say we were real curious, my friends, my peers and I, about the city, and we did a lot of wandering around the city, Noe Valley, all these places that were sort of interest. That wasn't one that, and maybe that's sort of the limitation of where I grew up and my world, in that I didn't ever have friends that for example, that I visited there, even though I had
You
friends.
had classmates who were from there, though, right?
I don't know who was bused and who wasn't bused. It sort of was really not something that was brought up.
And how did you hear about that neighborhood in the news or?
Yeah, it's like stuck in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really think that I had the curiosity to find out about it, that I might now be interested. I mean, I actually did look it up after to see the history of it, which was quite interesting.
Right. But at the time, it wasn't
But at the
discussed
time,
by your peers
it was like
or
a
your
name.
family.
Yeah. I wasn't worried or as conscious of what those people might have been going through. I didn't feel that kind of social consciousness that maybe today is more prevalent.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel included at school?
I felt included pretty much. I was thinking that the worst feeling of not being included had to do more with my peers, girlfriends who were on and off friends, like ganging up on each other, or bullying, or that kind of thing, or losing interest or being jealous. That was more of a problem than fitting into school. I felt part of the school.
Mm-hmm. Were you in any clubs or sports teams?
I was part of a program that was kind of interesting at the time. It was new. I was a science docent. So there was a program of college kids who were running nature tours throughout the city for elementary school kids. So it was funny. They were like at the Palace of Fine Arts and some of the parks around San Francisco. The Palace of Fine Arts sounds strange, but that had a lot of ducks. We had a duck pond there, so we would do this walk. Anyway, I was a high school docent so the college kids taught taught the children, and the docents were like sort of tour guides. We sort of guided the kids along and also learned from it. So that was a kind of an interesting program that was outside of school. It sort of fueled my interest in nature and learning through nature as opposed to just book learning.
Yeah. And there was a group of docents, and what was that a diverse group, or was it?
That was not a diverse,
Okay.
but actually the college people were diverse. At least there was one. The one guy I worked with was Asian, and he had a dog named Cosmo, a black lab. That I remember as so strongly.
Good memory.
Yeah, he was Japanese, and he was one of the teachers on the group. So they had programs that were interesting that went beyond just. I'm trying to think if I was in any clubs. I was in plays, but I wasn't in drama per se. I was more we had class plays that were really fun. So you automatically sort of participated if you're in your junior play, your senior play. I wasn't very much into music. I almost ran track. I was kind of intimidated.
Thought about it.
I was intimidated. There was an African-American coach. I was really quick. I was like a little sprinter because I was small. There was an African-American coach, and he said, "You can do it. You can do it. You should try to do it. Try out, And there were all these really strong women, mostly African-American athletes. So that's an experience. I was a little intimidated by that, and so I didn't end up doing it. I ended up becoming a runner, as you know. But I didn't compete. I never competed. I sort of used that as an excuse. I don't want to compete. But I really think it was because I was intimidated that I wasn't as strong or as potent.
So that's one instance of being intimidated. Were you ever intimidated racially by anything?
No, I wasn't intimidated feeling afraid. I was only intimidated that I couldn't keep up.
You felt like you weren't good
I
enough.
wasn't good enough, yeah.
But were there any instances where race played a role in any interactions you had? Any fear or any hesitation with any other races?
Nope. I really didn't have that. I actually mixed with, I had boyfriends of all colors, and we just, I never was threatened in that way. I think it's pretty amazing.
And do you think it's because it's San Francisco, some of the culture, the values of the West Coast, or do you think there's a different reason about yourself that might have made it
I
different?
think it's both. But I think it was the times. I think we really relished the idea that our school was cohesive like this and that we embraced it. It was automatically diverse. It wasn't like you had to make it diverse. You didn't have to bring people in. It was there, and you had to live with it and have an attitude that would, I think, accept. And I feel that going so far as be interested in these other communities, these other kind of people, than yourself. But I do think that these 60s eyes, and I do think that my parents, I can't say they were that open-minded towards the end of their life, but in that time, I really do think that my family's values supported that kind of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you were typical, or did you get the sense that other students were segregating by race more?
I think that there was I think it was my perspective a lot. I think I was idealistic, but I think that my friends would say the same thing, my close friends from then. My sister, I had a little conversation with her when I told her I was going to do this, and she said, yeah, because she went there too,
Mm-hmm.
and she had a similar experience, but she was like 4 years ahead, so it wasn't, the 60s were not quite, the cultural changes were not quite as impactful. But I was saying earlier, there were times where people of certain races did were hung together.
Mm-hmm.
And there were certain programs, like there was a drill team, and the drill team had all black women. You know, it was all black women. And I think it was partly because that was their, you know, their skill and understanding of that program. And they made it. They drew together and made that program. And I think there were students, you know, probably there were some clubs that may have, there was a gay club, actually, I think. And there was the Black Student Union I was mentioning, and that was very active. So that would have, I don't know if those clubs were open to other people. I didn't really pursue it myself.
Do you know what kind of initiatives the Black Student Union was taking?
I didn't know much what the Black Student Union was doing. All I know, though, is that they had people come and speak to them. And when I was looking through the yearbook, I noticed that Herbie Hancock was addressing the Black Student Union. There's a photograph of that.
Oh, wow.
Which was like, wow.
They had some celebrity guest speakers.
Yeah. So, and it was San Francisco.
Yeah.
And San Francisco, I think, was kind of pivotal city then. So I'm really like kind of proud to have lived there and grown up there, and to have experienced it as much as I did, even though I came from a fairly, you know, protected kind of environment and family and socioeconomic situation. Although I felt that at those times that wasn't stressed, you know, class or socioeconomics was not something that was pointed to as, you know, that someone was better than somebody else.
Was there an awareness of it, do you feel?
I didn't feel like it was. There were other aspects of my life that I may have felt that, but not at the school. I think for myself, I always wanted to assimilate and be blended in with people. And that was part of my mode, because I got a lot from my parents about anti-Semitism, and I didn't want to point myself out and call attention to that.
You were trying to fit in.
Yeah. And I don't think I was the only one. I mean, I think that there were other people.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That was a dynamic at the time. What else do you think contributed to the successful integration at your school?
Okay, that's the the vital. Well, I do think that I think that the culture of the school, the student body, and the faculty, even the principals, and all of the teachers were diverse, and were starting to present kind of subjects that were a little off the main path. Modern dance, creative writing, you know, just things that were a little bit more taking you away from that lock on thinking. And, you know, we mentioned the 60s. I think that influenced us. I think the fact that we were already diverse and we accepted. Everybody was accepted. So I just think that something was going right there. I'm not saying that there weren't some things that were tricky, you know, and that there probably were moments of tension and moments of, you know, identity crisis, because we're trying to find our place, and also to try to find our future from there. So, but as a launching pad, I think it was a pretty good place for I don't know what the percentages were for graduation, but you know, you hear about statistics nowadays about so many people not graduating. I think that I don't think that was much of a factor when I was going to school. Truancy wasn't a huge factor. Not graduating wasn't a huge factor. They had a lot of counseling. I don't know if they have counselors now. We had a lot of counseling. My only complaint about that time for myself was that the gender equity was a little bit off. Title IX hadn't come through yet. You look in the yearbooks, all the sports pages, it's all guys. They were diverse, but it was all guys. And so I found myself coming out, and the counseling didn't seem to give me options for girls, the same kind of options for girls' future. And but I'd grown up, with my parents and my father, who was determined we would be educated and we'd have careers. So that was my push. That wasn't at the school, but I don't think it impacted, segregation or desegregation. But that was one of the things that was lacking, I thought, in the culture. It was also the times that hadn't quite happened yet.
Right. So you kind of felt a little bit held back by that?
I did, but I didn't let it hold me back. I went to college. I got into college and did all the... but there was counseling and there was academic help at the school, like lots of counseling. I don't see that. I didn't see that so much in your experience when you were in school. But
college counseling or more
college counseling and any counseling. We used to have to go to the counselor every certain. We had appointed times to talk to counselors. But
Rachel, did you grow up here in Seattle?
Yes. Until I was 10, I lived in California. Yeah. So we were still in the Bay Area, and then moved up here when I was 10.
Can you guys talk about that transition from San Francisco to Seattle and how some of the West Coast values kind of interact with desegregation?
Yeah, first of all, maybe I'm wondering how you viewed in the school situations you were in San Francisco were public school. It was in the East Bay.
Yeah, from what I remember when I was younger in the Bay Area, it was a little bit more diverse, my classmates. And then I feel like when we moved up to Washington, we were in Edmonds, and it was mostly white, students at my class. So that was a little bit different. I was at the time more focused on trying to fit in, kind of like you were saying, because from moving schools, that was my perspective. And it was, I think what you describe of your high school experience was like a very specific and sort of special time where people were very open-minded and, accepting and feeling like there was a cultural change going on. And I grew up at a time when there was still like segregation happening, but it wasn't being talked about or really actively addressed. It's just kind of set in places. So that differs quite a bit, from what was happening in your experience.
Were you aware that people were being treated differently by...
Not until I was older, again, when you start to get educated about it and hear about people's experiences. So like in college, taking courses and meeting people from different backgrounds, learning more about that, and then in retrospect, kind of seeing how that impacted my experience. But yeah, I think again, like what you went through, I don't know, it was probably not successful in many places, but where the government was sort of taking an active role in trying to have students be integrated and busing students to sort of break down barriers that had been built up over a long period of time. It's interesting that like how you describe your school was more successful than probably a lot of places in doing that. And again, just like from reading things where, white flight and people setting up private schools to avoid having to integrate their children is pretty extreme, but it's fairly common in our country.
Yeah, it's interesting that that was so long ago that I went to this school, and that as I look at modern, schools, I just think I think some things, there's more awareness and some things are better, but not all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree.
It's maybe quite a unique experience that I think we got some things right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah, Stefanie, I'm curious what you think your experience taught you that maybe like someone else who didn't have such a harmonious experience missed out on. Like, what are the things that you think, how did that impact the person you are today? And if you could tell Mitchell about that.
Yeah, I think it had a lot to do with who I became, because, well, I've become a freelance documentary-style photographer, and one of the things that I love is the beauty of people, and their faces, and I'm curious about other people and other people's experiences that I could never have. And my career has taken me into other people's lives. And one of the things that I did a lot of work at the Seattle World School, which used to be the bilingual orientation school, which was a transitional school for immigrant and refugee students coming in to learn English and then move into more mainstream schools where they do have some language support. And it was like, traveling the world. I documented those programs and those kids, and it was, like I said, it was like traveling around the world and places you could never even imagine, Burundi and, places in Eastern Europe and just South America, Haiti, and I get a lot of pleasure out of seeing that beauty. That's just sort of, it did impact me, and so, and also just that I have friends and lovers of varying races and colors. So I just have always been interested in different people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've kind of always observed that about you, that you're very interested in everybody's story and their background, and then in your work as a photographer, sort of capturing their essence in images. It's always been important to you.
I'm glad you could see that.
Yeah.
What I tried to do.
Yeah. And of course, you're always been very welcoming to everyone and making friends, on every trip and travel that we did. Yeah, it's sort of a part of your nature, I would say.
Yeah. Did I give you an awareness of being open to people of different people?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. You've always tried to show us, arts and, cuisine from different cultures and take us on trips to see different places. And then just in the way that you treat people, kind of following the golden rule of like do unto others. I think we kind of were brought up with sort of that sensitivity to, you don't know what other people have been going through, and to treat people with kindness and care, and just be open and welcoming.
Yes. And I know your children are getting that too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I see, my children in their, they're in daycare, but I I don't know if it was like this for you, but I really appreciate seeing like what they're learning. And I think with some of the modern day values, like diversity, equity, and inclusion being sort of included in the lessons that they're learning and the activities that they're doing, like more so than I think maybe my generation, we were sort of skipped over a little bit in that respect, and now there's a renewed attention on trying to teach people those values.
Yes, wonderful.
Yeah.
I have a question, because you said you grew up in the 60s when the U.S. was really coming to terms with our history. It seems like in 2023 we want to forget everything and just move on. What do you guys think about that? Can you guys talk about that?
I really get upset thinking about our country and what's going on now and what's gone on in the last 5 or 10 years. I have a hard time talking about it because it's kind of very emotional to see some of the directions and some of the thinking, prevalent thinking of people. I see a huge gap between what I thought in the 60s and 70s and what we're living now. It's really alienating to me. But I live for my children and my grandchildren and what's there for them. And I trust my kids, my sons, to... I think that's all you can do. It may be part of aging, too, that I experience this. But how about you, as far as the...
I just sort of feel like there's a split in our country, and we're almost in a bubble where, in more liberal places, where at least some people are trying to engage and address some of the inequalities. But like, a huge portion of the country is sort of like just looking out for their own interests and not wanting to help people, where it's like you don't want to pay more taxes to help people in need. You just want keep your own money and take care of yourself. And it's like, like with Grandpa, it's like he started off as like a liberal Democrat, and then by the time he was in his old age, he was Republican, like following Fox News and all the like Trump craziness. So I don't know. It's interesting. I think, I appreciate that you have sort of not gone down that path, as you've gotten older. And I don't know what, it's maybe just part of the way you are, but I don't know if like any of those ideas have been appealing to you, where it's just sort of like, look out for yourself. And I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I just have always believed, I think people have to think for themselves, and really think about, try to look at things maybe a little more objectively than subjectively, and then tie your ideas, which I think maybe it's social media. I just think that people are getting these bundles of ideas that they just add to their head, and spit back out.
It's sort of,
and that there's a missing link of thinking for yourself. And
everybody has a team, and they sort of just agree with whatever their leaders are saying.
And even our leaders are telling us to think certain ways that are not giving us room to think.
And I feel like a lot of people have this fear that everyone else is sort of gaming the system. So, like right now, it's like the Republican pushes to put like work requirements on all these benefits because they think people are just being lazy and like gaming the system. And there's kind of a human tendency to do that, assume that about other people. And that's not very like generous way of approaching people. It's kind of an understanding that there are people that need it and they're working hard and are struggling, to make a living. And so it's not going to hurt you to like let them get some benefits.
And it is, I think your word, assumptions, is the word.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it does bring us back to our subject of the desegregation, the assumptions, the myths, that some people are better than others.
Mm-hmm.
And just intrinsically, we're all equal. You make your way in different ways and get where you get.
Right.
But to not have the humanity,
Mm-hmm.
or to not know that maybe you were lucky where you ended up.
Right.
Because
we had a lot of privileges,
Yeah.
and there's people who have been held back, for hundreds of years. Systemically, they weren't given the same privileges. I mean, they were enslaved, not allowed to buy houses, and so
Right.
to just act like we're all starting at equal footing is not realistic.
Just gonna jump in here. We're at
2
about
minutes.
41 minutes. So,
Okay.
if you want to share any closing thoughts, anything you want to say to each other before I stop the recording.
Oh, I'm so glad that you would do this with me, Mitch.
Yeah, it's been really fascinating learning about your high school experience and your background in San Francisco. I didn't know a lot of this stuff before, and I hadn't seen some of these pictures, and it's been really amazing.
And it's since we lost grandparents, my parents in June, I've really thought a lot about, legacy and of course I thought a lot about them when I was thinking about my attitudes going to this high school. And then I thought about how little I knew really of my parents' life before I came around. And that's, I think, interesting to know about I want to share that if you're interested about what life was like, what my story was.
Yeah, I mean, I love hearing about it, and you lived through such a sort of tumultuous time, in your youth. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear.
And yet we come up with this kind of unique high school experience, which I think is a success story. If we were
Sounds like it.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for coming in with me.
You're welcome.